Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 7 Part 9 based on novel. So let's start. Boundless fluctuations of energy swept across Lindong's body the instant the desolate seed was formed. Contained within these fluctuations were incredibly rich and formidable desolate force. Is this desolate force? These strong and familiar fluctuations were immediately detected by all the surrounding disciples. After sensing it, each and every one of them was shocked. To be able to emit desolate force, one had to first succeed in condensing a desolate seed. And to be able to condense a desolate seed, one must have mastered the desolate art till the 3rd level. For most disciples to reach that level, it would require many months of hard work. Even those senior direct disciples like Jiang Hao had taken an entire month in order to condense a desolate seed. However, under their nose, Lindong used less than half an hour to condense a desolate seed. Is that fellow even human? Asked a few disciples as they looked at each other in black dismay as a feeling of powerlessness washed over their hearts. Lindong's training progress made people unable to even muster the courage to compete with him. This fellow was simply too sick. A shocked expression swiftly flashed past the blind man's face at this moment. He was not shocked by the incredible rate that Lindong managed to condense his desolate seed. What made him really shocked was that Lindong actually managed to withstand the repulsive force from the desolate stone. The blind old man was obviously well aware of the might of the desolate stone. Although at the beginning the desolate stone was only repelling Lindong by instinct, its strength was something that a disciple like Lindong was absolutely unable to contend with. However, right now, Lindong had actually managed to withstand the repulsion from the desolate stone. If not, he would not have been able to absorb such a massive amount of desolate force and condense a desolate seed. He could even resist the repulsion of the desolate stone, said the blind old man before chuckling once. This disciple called Lindong was truly surprising. Under the gazes of the numerous people around, Lindong slowly opened his faintly closed eyes. At this moment, a grey glow swept past from within his eyes, which made him look somewhat peculiar. At this point, Lindong's fingers were no longer on the desolate stone. He stared at the desolate stone, before a faint upward curl involuntarily surfaced on his lips. So what if it was a pure yuan treasure? In the end, it was still subdued by him. That previous temperate white glow was obviously radiated by the mysterious stone talisman within Lindong's body. That thing was extremely low-key and it hardly made a move. However, every time it did, it was able to achieve quite a good result. Lindong examined the fist-sized desolate seed hovering in the middle of his dantian for a while. Within that desolate seed, he could feel a mysterious energy. It was quite vigorous and it should be the so-called desolate force. One has to practice the desolate art till the 3rd level in order to condense a desolate seed. Looks like my desolate art has reached the 3rd level, Lindong thought to himself as he rubbed his chin. He was obviously extremely satisfied with this result. Although it had to be said that he relied on the devouring ancestral symbol and the mysterious stone talisman, this was obviously not a major issue for the pragmatic Lindong. Lindong was clearly aware that it was not difficult for him to learn the desolate art since he had the devouring ancestral symbol. According to his calculations, if he was to shut himself off and practice in front of the desolate stone for an entire month, it would not be difficult for him to reach the 7th level of the desolate art. Furthermore, right now, the only disciples that could reach that stage were Jiang Hao and the other 3 senior direct disciples. Of course, Lindong did not know that when ordinary disciples reached the 3rd level of desolate art, the desolate seed that they condensed was only the size of a peach seed. However, the quality of the desolate force within their desolate seed was so much more inferior compared to the desolate force produced by his desolate seed. However, right now, Lindong did not bother practicing the desolate art. He knew that his previous performance was quite eye-catching. If he was to act more ruthlessly, he was afraid that it would affect the morale of the other disciples. Therefore, when his desolate seed condensed and took shape, Lindong withdrew his hand and retreated to the outside of the platform under the numerous gazes of the surrounding people. On the platform, those gazes still followed Lindong as he retreated, causing the surrounding atmosphere to turn slightly weird. This caused Lindong to feel somewhat helpless. Fortunately, this situation did not continue for long. After staring at Lin Dong for a while, those disciples finally returned to reality. They gave a soft sigh before finally withdrawing their gazes and continued their training. Only upon seeing those gazes finally turning away, did Lin Dong heave a deep sigh of relief. Just as he retreated away from the platform, he heard some sounds coming from behind him and hurriedly turned around. Having turned around, he saw the blind old man that was previously standing at the entrance of the stone pyramid, was now standing behind him. The blind old man used his ashen-grey eyes to stare at Lin Dong, before faintly sweeping over his body. As he did that, Lin Dong felt a vague fluctuation passing gently and swiftly scanning across his body, causing his heart to immediately turn cold. If that fellow Ju Tong knew that his record was surmounted by a later generation member, his expression would surely be splendid, said the blind old man. His voice was incredibly hoarse, however, it possessed a mysterious strength that could touch a person's heart and soul. Lin Dong did not dare to neglect this mysterious blind old in front of him. Although he could not detect any yuan power fluctuation from the blind old man, he had an intuition that this blind old man was likely more powerful than the two hall masters. Worthy of the Dao sect? Thinking about this, Lin Dong could not resist but secretly voice his admiration. These were the hidden aces of the super sects. After accumulation over countless years, there would definitely be a few terrifying individuals hidden within. With a thought, he respectfully saluted towards the blind old man and said, "This junior used some unorthodox methods and cannot be compared to senior Ju Tong. In this world, the result is all that matters." "That fellow Ju Tong was also blessed just like you," said the blind old man casually before giving a smile. Lin Dong casually scratched his head. "It seems like that senior Ju Tong was a rare genius that was blessed." "You haven't found a martial arts, right?" said the blind old man as he stared at Lin Dong with his pupil-less grey eyes. Lin Dong awkwardly nodded his head. There were many martial arts stone tablets here. However, he had yet to discover anything that piqued his interest. "Looks like you are quite ambitious. If you are so confident in yourself, follow me and I'll bring you to the place where Ju Tong went before," said the blind old man. Without saying anything else, he proceeded to turn around and walk towards the depths of the Great Hall. His behavior seemed as if he did not care if Lin Dong was going to follow him or not. Lin Dong felt slightly helpless after seeing how carefree the blind old man was. However, his final statement generated quite a bit of interest within him. Although he had only entered the desolate hall for a short while, he had heard of the great senior Ju Tong quite a few times. Therefore, he was especially interested in this person, who had an extremely high place in the hearts and minds of the Dao sect disciples. Taking a step forward, Lin Dong closely followed behind the blind old man. The blind old man's walking pace was consistent with no trace of anxiousness nor slowness. His small footsteps were akin to a sickly old man that had to move slowly due to a lack of strength. Lin Dong calmly followed him and he did not lose his cool because of the old man's slow and stumbling speed. Instead, his eyes looked at his nose, while his nose faced his heart and he stayed calm throughout the journey. Under this slow walking pace, Lin Dong walked for roughly an hour within this martial arts hall, before discovering that the old man in front had suddenly stopped. When the old man stopped, Lin Dong raised his eyes instantly. Promptly, he saw that in front of him was a bowl-shaped light membrane. Within it were 4 barely visible stone tablets standing erect quietly. "Kai?" The blind old man slowly raised his thin and wrinkled palm. As he gently swiped downwards, a ray of light shot out of his finger. After which, Lin Dong saw that the ray of light had directly tore apart the light membrane and forcefully ripped a small opening. "Is that mental energy?" Lin Dong narrowed his eyes and stared intensely at the old man's fingertip. At that instant where it sparkled, he clearly detected a familiar fluctuation, which was mental energy. However, the mental energy fluctuation that was being emitted from the body of the old man was countless times more solidified than those emitted by him. If Lin Dong's mental energy was equivalent to a small spring, the old man was perhaps equivalent to an ocean. There was simply no way to compare the two of them. His primary focus is on mental energy. Seeing the old man's action, Lin Dong's heart trembled. However, he suddenly understood why he did not feel any yuan power fluctuation from the old man's body. It seems like this blind old man primarily cultivated his mental energy. This was the first time he had ever seen a person with such powerful mental energy. The blind old man did not know what Lin Dong was thinking and proceeded to tear open the hole. He gently walked step by step inside, while Lin Dong rapidly followed him behind. After entering the light membrane, the ray of light grew dim instantly. A mysterious pressure started to radiate from the front, causing Lin Dong's heart to turn cold. Noticing the pressure, he raised his head and looked towards his front. At that spot, stood 4 black-colored stone tablets. Furthermore, the pressure was coming from those stone tablets. The black-colored stone tablet quietly stood within the light, and it looked just like a fearsome ancient beast. A wave of shocking evil aura was faintly emitted by it before it rippled across the air and causing one to feel pressured. These 4 stone tablets were extremely tall and large, and they were even larger than the other stone tablets that Lin Dong saw in the martial arts hall previously. Moreover, the fluctuation that the stone tablets possessed was something that those stone tablets did not have. Each of these 4 stone tablets contains an extremely powerful martial art. From a certain point of view, they can be considered as the strongest martial arts other than the great desolated scripture. The blind old man placed his hands behind his back. His grayish-white eyes looked towards the 4 stone tablets as he spoke faintly. Ordinary disciples will not get to learn these 4 martial arts. Currently, only the 4 senior direct disciples in Desolate Hall have learnt the martial art on the first stone tablet. As for the remaining 3, no one has successfully mastered them yet. Lin Dong's face changed a little. The Desolate Hall was brimming with talented geniuses. It was unexpected that only 4 people had learnt one of these 4 martial arts. Is there any ranking amongst these 4 martial arts? Lin Dong suddenly asked. If one must really rank them, the martial arts on the first stone tablet is indeed a little easier to learn. The second is a little trickier. As for the third and fourth, it would not be overboard to say that they are the strongest. Back then, Ju Tong mastered the martial art on the third stone tablet. As for the fourth, he did not successfully master it the first time he was here. The blind old man slowly said. Oh. Lin Dong was slightly moved. The martial art on the 4th stone tablet was actually this abnormally difficult? Even that senior Ju Tong failed to master it? It is not because his talent is lacking. Rather, the martial art on the 4th stone tablet has some peculiar requirements. The blind old man paused when he spoke until this point. As he briefly glanced at Lin Dong, he finally continued, this martial art requires someone who is good at both yuan power and mental energy. Lin Dong's heart suddenly jumped. Was this directed at him? You can observe first before you decide on the stone tablet martial arts that you wish to learn. The blind old man waved his hand and spoke in an indifferent manner. Understood. Lin Dong hurriedly replied in a respectful manner upon hearing this. After which, he swiftly stepped forward. His eyes swept across the first stone tablet. The stone tablet's body was as black as a piece of metal. For ancient words that were seemingly carved by a Dremel appeared on the tablet in a glaring fashion. Great Star Majestic Fist. Lin Dong's eyes stared at those ancient words. He could sense a majestic, wild and violent sensation pouncing from those words. It was likely that this martial art was best suited for a direct brute force practitioner. Is this the martial arts that Jiang Hao and the rest learnt? Lin Dong's eyes flickered slightly. He mused for a moment before taking another step and walked towards the second stone tablet. The second stone tablet had a dark black longsword carved onto it. Black fog lingered on the longsword. There was a dark and cold aura seeping from it, and even Lin Dong felt his skin turn chilly. Great Dark Erosion Sword. These simple 4 words were permeated with a chilling aura. This martial art was different from the Great Star Majestic Fist, which relied on might and brute force. However, that dark and cold feeling felt just like having maggots in one's bones, causing one to be unable to dodge them. Lin Dong stood in front of this stone tablet and mused for a moment. Finally, he shook his head. This martial arts was far too dark and cold, and it was unsuitable for him. Immediately, he ceased hesitating, turned around and walked towards the third stone tablet. The third stone tablet appeared a lot more ordinary than the first two. It was also dark grayish in color. There was a human figure seated on the tablet. However, that person's body looked shriveled and dry. At a glance, it appeared as though it was a shriveled land. However, it was vaguely possible to feel a shocking energy being emitted from within his carcass. Lin Dong's eyes stared at the human figure. After which, his eyes were lifted slightly. He saw 3 ancient words on the human figure drawing. Great Desolate Body. That name was ordinary without any fancy aspect to it. However, it possessed a majestic aura. This is the martial art that Senior Ju Tong chose her. Lin Dong curled his mouth while his brows also frowned a little. Great Desolate Body should be a martial art that strengthened one's body. For Lin Dong, there was a clear conflict since he had already cultivated in the Green Heaven Materialized Dragon skill. Currently, he had already spent quite a lot of effort on learning the Green Heaven Materialized Dragon skill. If he was to divert his attention and practice another body-tempering martial arts, he might end up failing at both instead. Based on what the blind old man previously said, Lin Dong knew that the Great Desolate Body was one of the best amongst the 4 martial arts. Only the 4th martial art, which Lin Dong had yet to see, could be compared with it. From this, one could tell just how powerful this martial art was. However, Lin Dong already had the Green Heaven Materialized Dragon skill. Lin Dong hesitated in front of the stone tablet for a long while. Finally, he shook his head and decisively turned away. The Great Desolate Body might be powerful, but if given a choice, Lin Dong would choose the Green Heaven Materialized Dragon skill, which he was more familiar with. At a short distance away, the blind old man's wrinkled face twitched when he saw this scene. Immediately, his grayish-white eyes stared intently at Lin Dong's footsteps. Flop. Lin Dong's legs paused in front of the final stone tablet. He inhaled a deep breath of air before raising his head and looking at the stone tablet in front of him. There were no words on the stone tablet. However, there was a large black eye on the dark black tablet's surface. Lin Dong was startled when he saw that black-colored eye. At this moment, the latter also appeared to be staring at him. This sensation caused all the hair on Lin Dong's body to involuntarily stand. This martial art is a little creepy. Although Lin Dong felt creeped out, he still forcefully stared back at that black-colored eye. The atmosphere quietened down instantly. After this face-off lasted for a couple of minutes, Lin Dong suddenly discovered that the black eye on the stone tablet had actually blinked. This discovery directly caused the skin on Lin Dong's face to turn numb. However, before he could do anything, a slight black light shot out from that black eye. The light entered Lin Dong's opened eyes. This sudden action startled Lin Dong. Immediately, the yuan power within his body began to swirl as a reflex action. However, he immediately discovered that the black light did not cause him any harm. Instead, some information flowed through his mind. There was a unique beast in ancient times called Huang, and it had one eye. Whenever it opened its eye, everything within thousands of kilometers would turn into waste. As time passed, it will erode one's vitality. Wave after wave of ancient information swiftly flashed across Lin Dong's mind. This also allowed him to have a better understanding of this martial art. Based on the information that he obtained, the martial art on this stone tablet was called the Desolate Demon Eye. This martial art was seemingly derived from the unique ancient beast called Huang. Although Lin Dong was unaware if the complete mastery of this martial art would enable him to reach the terrifying stage of turning everything within thousands of kilometers into wasteland, it was still possible to see just how powerful this martial art was. Those previous messages did not contain any information regarding its cultivation methods. Clearly, this martial art was very demanding on its practitioners. Lin Dong's footsteps paused in front of the stone tablet. He raised his eyes and stared intently at the black-colored eye in front of him. His eyes flickered. Clearly, there was quite a huge struggle going on in his heart. The Desolate Demon Eye was quite sinister, and even Lin Dong did not possess the confidence that he could successfully master it. If he was unable to learn it, he would have wasted a great amount of time for nothing. The blind old man remained quiet as he looked at Lin Dong, who had fell into silence. He did not know which martial art Lin Dong would choose. This quiet and tense atmosphere continued for half an hour. After which, the blind old man saw Lin Dong take a step back. He has given up her. The blind old man's grayish-white eyes lowered slightly upon seeing this. He felt a little disappointed for some unknown reason. His shriveled hand gently rubbed his eyes. Pa! The sudden sound of someone sitting down rang out just as the blind old man felt a little disappointed. He raised his eyes. After which, he was surprised to see that Lin Dong had already sat down in front of a stone tablet. Elder, I shall choose this martial art. Lin Dong's voice was also transmitted over at this moment. It landed into the ears of the blind old man. The blind old man was quiet for a moment upon hearing this. Suddenly, his voice became hoarse as he said, "There is a risk in learning this martial art. If anything goes wrong, your eyes might end up like mine." Lin Dong's heart was shaken slightly. Based on what he said, it seems like this blind old man had also practiced the desolate demon eye before. However, it seems like he failed. There is no free lunches this world. Lin Dong inhaled a deep breath of air. One must pay the price for any reward. This concept was something that he understood right from the start. After his words sounded out, Lin Dong's eyes slowly shut in front of the complicated expression of the blind old man. Lin Dong sat quietly in front of the black stone tablet. He shut his eyes tightly while the yuan power fluctuation over his entire body was being gradually suppressed at this moment. At a short distance behind him, the blind old man quietly observed this scene. The complicated expression on his wizened face was gradually withdrawn. He had indeed practiced this desolate demon eye before. However, he eventually failed because of an accident, resulting in both of his eyes becoming blind. The price was really quite a heavy one. The fact that Lin Dong ultimately chose this risky martial art also exceeded his expectations. Back then, that fellow Ju Tong hesitated for a long while before finally giving up on the desolate demon eye and ended up practicing the great desolate body instead. Although these two martial arts were comparable, the blind old man knew that there was an essential difference between the two. The great desolate body could strengthen one's physical body and improve one's overall combat strength. However, the desolate demon eye is a purely aggressive move. If one was to discuss the damage that they could cause, the latter was clearly superior to the former. Of course, this did not mean that Ju Tong's talent was lacking. Rather, it was not suitable for him to learn desolate demon eye. Moreover, given Ju Tong's character, it was not surprising that he chose the great desolate body instead. Whether you can successfully learn it will depend on your own luck. Relax, our desolate hall has rarely had a young person who could be compared with that fellow from back then. This old man will not stand by and let you suffer the same fate as me. The blind old man stared at Lin Dong's back. A moment later, he sighed and softly muttered. He was aware that Chen Zhen and Wu Dao had high expectations for Lin Dong. If the latter became blind just like him in the martial arts hall, it was likely that those two old fellows would be furious beyond belief. The blind old man sat down after his voice sounded. He could sense that even though Lin Dong had not moved, at this moment, there were waves of mental energy being emitted from his Niwen palace. Finally, it lingered over the black-colored eye of the stone tablet. For Seal Heaven Symbol Master. The blind old man merely probed casually before he was immediately able to detect Lin Dong's mental energy cultivation level. Instantly, he gently nodded his head. If Lin Dong's yuan power and mental energy were to be considered separately, he might not be considered overly outstanding amongst members of his generation. However, considering the both of them together, he was considered as extremely decent. The blind old man gradually quietened down. Everything once again became silent within this light film. Lin Dong's body suddenly trembled a little at this moment. An unusually vast and mighty mental energy suddenly rushed out from within his Niwen palace. Finally, it shot into that black-colored eye on the stone tablet. Kai? Lin Dong's mind suddenly became absent-minded just when his mental energy shot into that black eye. Immediately, he realized that his surrounding had started to distort. By the time he completely calmed his mind, he discovered that he had landed in a large barren land. The land was completely flat. At a glance, it appeared that the plains were extended to the horizon. There, the sky and the land formed a single line, appearing as though they were connected together. A desolate aura that was accompanied by an ancient vicissitude brewed and rose within this place. It appeared as though this was an ancient land. Lin Dong stood on the ground and looked at the sky and land. He involuntarily felt the insignificance of his existence. A helpless sensation climbed from deep within his soul and spread across his body, causing him to be unable to move. Huff. Lin Dong inhaled a deep breath of air before his eyes suddenly turned sharp. His straight spear-like body forcefully suppressed this powerless sensation. He was aware that this place was likely the mental realm within the stone tablet. A fight in this place might not cause fresh blood to spurt like in reality, but it was dangerous and vicious as well. Should one end up being at a disadvantage in a mental energy fight, it might perhaps leave a sequela, which would have serious repercussions for his future training progress. Suppressing the tiny and helpless sensation within his heart, Lin Dong took a stride forward. When his foot landed on the soft ground, an endless sensation appeared to seep in from under his foot and spread into his body. Boom! At this moment, the ground suddenly began to tremble intensely. Numerous ripples that were visible to the naked eye spread over this boundaryless land. It swiftly spread apart just like a pulse. Lin Dong's eyes quietly observed this scene. Under his calm observation, the distant ground suddenly began to tremble before it cracked, forming a large cracked line. The cracked line spread at a shocking speed. Within a short instant, it had reached tens of thousands of feet in length. That manner appeared as though it was an endless abyss. Ayo! After the deep abyss was formed, an extremely strange loud whining sound suddenly resounded across the land. An invisible ripple swept over the sky and it directly stirred a monstrous hurricane. Lin Dong's eyes were slightly focused as he observed the deep abyss that had been split and formed. That place was where the sound had originated from, and he could vaguely see an enormous shadow moving within the darkness. Lin Dong's eyes stared intently at the deep abyss before his eyes suddenly shrunk a moment later. Bang! Monstrous dust sputtered out from the deep abyss while Lin Dong's eyes shrunk tightly. After which, an indescribable black shadow suddenly flew out from the deep abyss like an earth dragon. Its enormous shadow covered the sun. Lin Dong looked at the enormous beast that had flown out from the deep abyss. Immediately, he gently inhaled a breath of air. The enormous beast's body was like a snake. However, it was tens of thousands of feet in size and its entire body was black in color. Meanwhile, an icy cold evil aura swept apart like a storm. On the head of that giant beast, the spot that attracted the most attention was not its large mouth, which was filled with sharp teeth. Instead, it was a large black eye on its forehead. The enormous eye was currently shut. However, for some unknown reason, the hair all over Lin Dong's body stood up when he saw that eye. Is that Huang? Lin Dong's voice was harsh. If he was right, this enormous beast that covered the sun should be the so-called Huang. Judging by its frightening aura, Lin Dong did not doubt that this unusual beast possessed the terrifying ability to turn tens of thousands of kilometer radius of land into barren land. Huang flew into the sky. Its enormous body meandered in the sky. Finally, it slowly lowered its enormous head and stared at Lin Dong, who appeared as tiny as an ant on the ground below. Lin Dong's expression suddenly turned solemn when Huang shifted its attention. He could sense that the ground he was on had actually begun to wither rapidly. Such frightening desolate force. Although Lin Dong was clearly aware that this was a mental realm and all that he had witnessed was not reality, he still felt an enormous pressure. The ground where Lin Dong stood on swiftly withered. A desolate color spread apart at a blinding rate. However, Lin Dong remained calm. He inhaled a violent breath of air before he stared back directly at that enormous being in the sky. If his mind showed signs of retreating at this moment, it was likely that he would be completely defeated in this metal battle. Kai? However, being directly stared at by Lin Dong clearly caused Huang to turn a little impatient. After which, the former's eyes shrunk when he realized that the enormous eye that Huang had kept shut was actually slowly opening up. Buzz. As Huang's enormous eye slowly opened up, Lin Dong could immediately sense the energy of the entire place turn wild and violent. Even the natural yuan power was fleeing from this dangerous region. The enormous eye slowly opened. There was an endless dark grayish color within the eye, and it was as though light could not penetrate through. Lin Dong's entire body was drenched in cold sweat when he saw this enormous eye opening. He immediately felt the skin on his head turn numb. Swoosh! The enormous eye finally opened completely. Instantly, 1,000 feet large grey light erupted from within that enormous eye. A grey beam flashed past, before the entire land instantly withered. The originally lush green color completely disappeared. Instead, taking its place was a desolate scene without life. Everything within thousands of kilometers had turned into barren land. However, Lin Dong's mind did not pay attention to his desolate surroundings at this moment. He could see that the enormous grayish beam was headed towards him at a terrifying speed. The grayish light was extremely fast. Within a flash, it had flashed past the sky. Its size also swiftly shrunk when it approached Lin Dong. By the time it reached Lin Dong's head, it was merely as tiny as a thumb. Kai? The grayish glow appeared to contain an extremely frightening energy. However, Lin Dong did not show any signs of avoiding it. This was because he was aware that this was a path that he must cross. Come, allow me to witness just how frightening the desolate demon eye is. Lin Dong slowly spread his arms. There were a sharpness and stubbornness flashing deep within his eyes. After which, the grayish glow shone onto his forehead in an unceremonious manner. A shocking headache spread across his mind instantly. Lin Dong's eyes also began to swiftly turn dark, appearing as though the light had disappeared. This video will end here.